everyone, it's Daphne from Scrap and Create. Today I'm going to start constructing my 8.5 by 10.5 mini album, and it's going to feature Lost in Paradise from Graphic 45. So with that, I'm going to go over a couple of the tools that I'm going to use. I don't want to spend too much time on it because most of you have seen the video before. You're going to need some score tape. And I like to have various sizes, but the one size you can't do without is the 3/8 inch. So make sure you've got that handy. That's what's going to hold all your hinges together. A pick tool to help me get the tape off. A scoring tool. Bone folders to make my folds crisp. Pair of scissors. I like a white jelly roll to write notes on my black paper. I also have a pencil. Of course, you have to have your art glitter glue. We won't use very much of this in this part of the process. This is mostly tape, but as we start to introduce the designer paper, we're definitely going to use that tape. I like to have a nice straight edge. Occasionally, I'll need to trim something and it doesn't fit conveniently into the trimmer, so having a straight edge is a good idea. You're going to need some chipboard, which I've already trimmed my pieces out. And of course, you're going to need some black or whatever color you choose cardstock to make the base album. And then I've got 2 pieces of my scrap chipboard glued together, and this will be my jig for later on when we're spacing the cover from the spine. So make sure you've got some extra chipboard glued together 2 wide, and that'll become your jig. And it needs to be the same chipboard that you're using in your project. Okay, so with that, I'm going to go ahead and sit down and get started. Because I'm going to do something a little bit different. Normally I do a portrait style book, but today we're going to do a landscape. And I haven't done that before. So we're going to go over the construction process from the very beginning. So we've got these 2 pieces of chipboard, and I'm going to tell you the measurements. They are 10.5 by 8.5. So 10.5 by 8.5, you need 2 pieces of chipboard. Then you're also going to need 1 for the spine. This is 2.5 by 8.5. So 2.5 by 8.5. And that is going to be the foundation of our book. You'll need 2 pieces of 12 by 12, and I'm going to lay these down side by side. You're going to see that in order to have enough to wrap over my page or my covers, I'm going to have to add some paper in the middle. Otherwise, my spine will be naked. This is 12 by 4.5, or 4.5 by 12, 4.5 by 12. So that means I can attach these 2 sheets, and when I fold it around, it'll be very clear of the spine. So again, you'll need 2 12 by 12s and then a 4.5 inch slice of another 12-inch sheet to make the whole cover for this album, because it's so wide. And again, the dimensions for the album itself are 8.5 by 10.5, and we're doing it in a landscape layout, which is why it's so wide. And this is kind of different for me. I don't usually do it this way. I usually do portrait, so I thought it'd be fun to mix it up. Get my tools out of the way, push that into place, and then we'll be able to start laying down our chipboard next. So I want to thank everybody for tuning in and liking and sharing and subscribing. We really appreciate it. And again, if there's ever a question about any of the projects, let us know in the comments below, or you can go on over to our website and send us an email. And we can get back to you in either form, whichever works best for you. I do my best to try to respond to questions and comments on the YouTube channel within a day. Sometimes a little more time will go by because I'm researching the answer, or it's an album I didn't make. And I've got to reach out to Christine and ask her to help us with the response. So, but like I said, for the most part, I want to try to get back to you guys in the same day or within a day. Okay, now I'm ready to lay down my spine. My spine is 2.5 by 8.5, 2.5 by 8.5. I've got some reference lines down here just to help me lay the spine in straight. And then once I get the spine piece in, I'm going to use it as the guide to set in the other 2 pieces. using my ruler down here is to get it right on these pencil marks. The light in here is terrible today, unfortunately, but it is what it is. I can wait no longer. So one of these is a factory edge, and that's the one I like to line off of. It's just always a little bit crisper than anything I can do. And if you look close, you can see that's a little fuzzy, very crisp. So I usually try to line the bottom off my factory edge. And when I lay on the two other sides, I'll do the same thing. It's usually a little straighter than anything I could do. Not always, but most of the time. Okay, that's it. Okay, now we're going to need that jig I talked about, which is just 2 pieces of chipboard, flush and then glued together. And that's what we're going to use as a spacer between this and the cover and the back cover. And that will get our book done. So I'm going to shift these things over a little bit. So I've already got adhesive on the back of this. So I'm going to start taking the backing off the tape. And that's my puppy in the background barking away. It's a rainy day here, so she's a little restless. So if you're in Southern California, and if you're in the San Diego area, this October we have a retreat, and there's information on our website, and we have a couple of seats left. So if you're interested, take a look. Right off the main menu, there's a menu item called Retreat, and there's some details about the retreat. So that's going to be in October here in San Diego, specifically in Rancho Bernardo, and we've got a couple of seats left. We'd love to see you there. I'll be there. And Julie will be there, and we'll be bringing all our new exciting collections from Graphic 45, as well as Stamperia, possibly some Ciao Bella. All right, so we want these corners to line up. So I'm looking for placement up and down, and then I want to push it as close to this as I can, and this is going to help me keep an even distance. And one side is a little more flat than the other, so I want to make sure that's the side I have down. So here's a tip. So when I place this jig, I'm pushing it up against the spine, but I'm exposing this tip because as I bring this in this way, I want to be able to see this corner and that corner line up. And it's really hard to get your chipboard exactly square, or at least I have trouble with that. So if I'm going to have any misalignment, I want it on the top because I want my book to stand up. So my goal is to have these be flush. And if there's anything that's off a little bit, I push it toward the top because I want my book to stand up. That's that. And even if it is off, it's very insignificant. And usually by the time you wrap your paper, you can't tell because that adds yet another layer. Okay, this is the side I want down. I'm just going to do some dry fitting real quick. Okay, looks good. I'm going to get my tape off. Well, the backing to the tape, not the tape itself. And I just used, I think this is 5/8, and I like a wider tape on these large panels just because it saves time in terms of laying it down. Any size works. But if you have a large surface, you know, it just goes faster if you have wider tape. So my most common are 5/8, 3/8, and 1/4 inch. Those are the sizes I try to keep on hand at all times. And I can live without all sizes. I can't live without 3/8. That's the size you absolutely have to have. If you're a mini maker, that is the minimum tape size that you're gonna want. That is exactly the right size to cover a 1/2 inch hinge. That's why it's so critical to have. You can use 1/4 inch, but to me that's just not quite enough coverage. Alrighty, that looks pretty good, so I'm gonna press it into place. Okay. Oh, that looks a little wide on top. Shoot, I did get a little wide. I'm gonna see if I can't lift it. I'm committed. It's in. It's just a little bit wider on top than I wanted. You can see there's a little wiggle room up here compared to down here. So that was me not taking my time and pushing this edge in. So the next thing we want to do is we've got some excess paper on the top. I'm going to just draw, I'm going to use my straight edge and just trim this off real quick. Did I bring a straight, did I bring a, actually I didn't. So I'm going to draw a line and use my scissors to trim it off. And it just starts to get bulky. So I'm just taking off the extra paper. As soon as I figure out what I did with my scissors, here they are. Okay. It doesn't have to be perfect because this is all going to get folded over on top of this. All right, so I would do the same thing on the edges if I thought there was too much excess, and it looks okay. I might trim a little off. I just use a simple ruler, and the width of the ruler is kind of my rule of thumb. You need a minimum, really, in my mind, of 1 inch to wrap around it neatly. And this is just a little more than 1 inch. About 1 inch and 1/8. Just because that happens to be that my ruler is not 1 inch wide. Okay, I'll do the same thing. I like jelly rolls because they show up on your black paper, but sometimes they can leak a little and leave a little bit of a blob on your paper. But it's easy to see, and I think it's easy for you guys to see in the tutorials. All right, so now we're going to go back to grab this jig again, and we're going to miter our corners. And I like to use this because I don't want to over trim my corners. You can always cut more away later. You cannot add paper back, and you want to make sure you've got enough to rise up over the edge of this chipboard, which is quite thick. So if you use double thickness, that should be enough. And if I had to measure it, I'd say it is about 1/8 of an inch. But it should just be double of whatever chipboard you're using. And then when I trim it, again, I'm going to trim on the outside of that line, so it just leaves a little more paper to work with. If you need, you can always trim it later. These miters, okay, I've got all the edges trimmed off. Ouch. Sorry about that, I stumbled on over. And so now we're ready to start folding this over and getting some tape on it and getting this laid down. So again, I'm going to use my 5/8 inch, but for you, you can use whatever you have. 3/8 is fine as well. I run a strip on the chipboard itself. And here it is. I was going to say I mislaid something. So everybody asks about this, and I'll go over it again. This is just, it's called an omnigrid. It's a square that you get in the fabric store. This one happens to be, I think it's 2.5. Yeah, 2.5 by 2.5. So it's just a square, and then there's these reference lines on it, which sometimes I'll use to run across a feature to make sure that it's flush or a certain distance from the edge. But mostly, I put this little pop dot on it, which is something that's normally on the back of a phone, and I just use this to lay down and tear my tape. And it's just convenience. I used to use this just plain, but I added the pop dot for 2 reasons. One, it's easier to handle. But 2, because it's relatively flat, I would misplace it. So by adding this, I can easily find it. Now, I am working with one of our subscribers and a friend of mine. Her name is Martha. We're actually looking at developing a tool specific to us. So it's not quite as busy, and I'm hoping to have something out soon, and we'll sell it for a very competitive price. In fact, this isn't very cheap at all, unfortunately. I think because of all the ink and the grid lines, it's kind of inexpensive. So I'd like to try to develop a tool similar to this, not quite as busy and cheaper. And if I do, it'll be available in our shop, and we've got some things, some prototypes in work right now. So I'm hoping to offer something like that soon. But in the meantime, if you don't want to wait, that's what this is. It's just called an OmniGrid. It's a 2.5-inch square, and they come in lots of different sizes, and it's used in sewing. So you'll find it over in your quilting section of any fabric store that you go to. I found this actually at Joann's. All right, so enough about that. So let's get our second line of tape. So I put one in on the chipboard on the bottom. Now I'm going to run a strip of tape across the top of the cardstock here. So you'll see there's a gap, but when you fold it over, this will get covered by what's down here. So you wind up getting 100% coverage on the tape for the wrap, and that's the objective, and that's why we do one on the chipboard and one on the cardstock. Okay, let me go ahead and do the other side, and I'm just going to do the two outside edges. We'll wrap those, and then we'll come back and add tape to either end. And this is tape intensive. Building a book does require quite a bit of tape for the building of the base of the book. Once you get into the designer papers, then we shift gears. And because nothing has a hinge, everything is just a flat mat laying down on another layer of the book, we just use glue to adhere those. So we can save a little bit of money using the wet adhesive. It's not quite as expensive as the tape, but the tape is really necessary on interactive pieces or your book won't last. I've tried even using different kinds of double-sided tape, but really score tape is the way you want to go if you want your book to last. And they take some time to put together, so most people want them to last. Okay, so that's done. So now I'm going to push this back in place, make sure it's looking good. All my edges look pretty good. Yeah, looks pretty good. I can get my tape off and I'm going to lay it down. So when we're working with the covers, what you want to do is you want to get the center done and then push out. So if you have any buildup or any paper that wants to overlap, you really want to push it toward the edge. You don't want it to bind up in the center. So you always want to go from the center out, pushing up and out, up and out, up and out. Okay, that's in. Now we're going to flip it and do the other side. So one of the things I did, I noted that this was a little bit wider than I wanted it to be. It's not perfect. One of the things you can do when you're putting your album together is once you get all your adhesive on, you get your tape backing off. If you run a bead of glue over your tape, that gives you an opportunity to pull it up if you're not happy with placement. I didn't do that, but you can do that, and I've done it in the past. I don't know why I didn't do it today. Just distracted, I guess. Sometimes you think you're a pro, so you stop doing those little things. I should have known better because this is such a big piece. It's really not that mini of a mini. It's more a maxi book. All right, so I'm just making sure that all this tape is grabbing. Now I'm going to come back and do my either end with the tape and start working on folding this over. And I'm not going all the way over because I don't want tape right there. So I'm stopping a little short. Whoops. That didn't grab, did it? All right. There we go. And then I'm just going to add that little bit. There we go. I'm going to flip it, do the same thing. Okay, I'm working my hinge in the middle, and I want to get this kind of creased and understand how it's going to behave before I fold these over, because as you're pulling it up, it's actually pulling on the paper, pulling slightly down. So I want that to happen before I tape these two edges down. Hopefully that makes sense. All right, everything's starting to look good. I'm going to get the tape off. Okay, so now I'm going to show you my corners. I've got this little tick of paper, so that needs to get folded in before the tape happens. And that's where we had trimmed it off. So there's a couple things I can do. I can fold it in, which is what I'm planning to do. The other thing is you could come back with a pair of scissors and trim that little bit off. And I don't like to trim it first. I like to fold it over and then trim what's left. And I'll do that on one corner so you can see what I'm talking about. So on this one, I'm not going to fold it in. I'm going to trim it so you can see what I'm talking about. As soon as I find, here it is, my pick tool. And it makes a nice clean, it lays down nice and clean when you do it that way too. It's just two different approaches. But never trim it before you fold it over, because you always run the risk of cutting it too short and having your chipboard exposed. Okay. So now all I'm going to do is press that down. So basically, I'm pressing it down so that it goes down over the edge of the chipboard. And I want to do that on both sides. You do it with your bone folder or your fingernail. And then just crease it. Now we're going to pull it over. Okay, and that's it. Okay, now you can see there's a little bit of an overlay. Here's what I want to do. I want to trim that off, but I don't want to trim it this way. I always want to trim away from the corner. So I'm going to put my scissors right under the edge of that. Just barely under the edge. And I just trimmed away from the corner. Now you can see how it's mitered. See, it's nice and clean. Now, even though it's not straight here, it doesn't matter because we're going to have another piece of paper that goes over this. But you can see that makes a nice miter. And always go from the corner and cut toward the center. And this one's going on a little easier. There's some tape there, so it's a little hard to cut. Okay. So that is one method, and I think it makes a nice clean cut. And a lot of times that's what I do. I think it's actually easier than fussing with it and trying to fold it in. So now on this side, I'm going to show you the second method. So I've gone ahead and pressed it down so that it's going over the edge of that. So the next thing we'll do is we will try to tuck this in by using our tool to fold that corner in on both sides. Now we're ready to take our, and you can see now it goes slightly curves in instead of going straight out. Or I hope you can see it. The light's not very good because it is raining, so I don't have a lot of natural light. I'm having to work with studio light, and it's never as good. Now I'm gonna make sure that stays in as I pull it over. I don't want it to pop back out. Okay. And so that makes for a nice corner too. And there's the second one. So here's what the first side looks like. We trimmed it out. Here's what the second side looks like. One of the things I like about the trimming out is typically it's less bulky. so you don't wind up with that little buildup in the corner like you do with this method. Okay, so I've got a little excess tape here, and I'm going to, because I don't want it to prematurely grab something, I'm going to try to remove some of that. I'm going to score it real quick and then try to roll it up. The other thing you could do is add this to it, but I'm going to lay some paper. It's ultimately going to get covered. I'm just not ready to do it yet, and I don't want it to grab something when I'm not ready. So I'm going to go offline and do that. I'm not going to have to, you guys don't have to sit through that. And I'm just going to score it with a X-Acto knife and roll it off. So that is our 8.5 by 10.5 cover. So the next thing we're going to work on is the spine. So the spine is, not spine, hinge. The hinge is going to be an 11. So this is 7 7/8 by 11, okay? And then I found the midpoint, which is 5.5 right here, and then I just back off my score lines from there. But I'm going to go ahead and tell you what they are. You're going to start at 2 3/4, and then you're going to score 1/2 inch. You're going to do 2 3/4, 3 1/4, 3 3/4, 4 1/4, 4 3/4, 5 1/4, 5 3/4, 6 1/4, 6 3/4, 7 1/4, 8 1/4. Is that right? Anyways, it's 1/2 inch every for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 score lines total. And that will hold your, this is what's going to hold all your pages in place. So I am actually going to be running a banner with the actual score line. So the banner is going to be correct. I may have said something wrong, but the banner will be correct. And it'll also be in the cut list. But one of the things I typically do is, I know it starts at 2 3/4 and it ends at 8 1/4. So I do these two score lines first, and then I just know it's a 1/2 inch in between until I meet that score line. That way I'm not having to think about it in between. All right, so now the next thing we're going to do is, for each one of the peaks, we had a piece of tape, and we're going to pinch that peak together, okay? Then we're going to skip what's called a gusset, and we're going to pinch the next peak together. Okay, and there are a ton of tutorials on this. If I'm not being clear, if you search for hidden hinge, you will find lots of tutorials for hidden hinge systems. If you don't feel like I'm explaining it very well for you. Okay, when you're done, this is what you're going to have. You're going to have 4 peaks and 3 of what are called gussets, okay? And this is what's called the hinge, okay? And I'm just burnishing these things together, okay? And the next thing that's going to happen is this whole piece is going to get put inside the center of our book, and it's what's going to hold our pages in place. Like so. So when we're placing this, our goal is to center it up and down and left and right. And because we have a 1/2 inch gusset between our pages here, we'd like to have a 1/2 inch gusset between the cover, the back cover, and the front cover. And that means we can add embellishments or flaps to these pages and not have them interfere with covers. So that's kind of the goal here. So we're just getting some visuals, and I'm doing some burnishing. I'm going to actually use my bone folder. Make sure this is all crisp. And then I'm going to get tape on the back of my hinge, and we're going to lay it down. And then if you're sitting, this is when you're probably going to want to stand. I like to stand up and lean over my project as I'm placing my hinge so I can see on top of everything. Okay. So now I'm going to get some tape on it, and I'm going to go around and frame it, and then make sure that everything in the center is completely covered with tape, because this is the anchor that holds your pages in place. So you don't want to skip on tape here. And if you're feeling like you can't make a commitment or you're not quite up for it, sometimes it's best to set the hinge aside and come back to it later when you're feeling it. The other thing you can do is once you get all your tape in, before you lay it down, run a bead of glue over your tape, which will give you some time to wiggle it. The upside of glue is it gives you some time. The downside of glue is it's permanent, so when it does dry, there's no lifting the hinge off without destroying it. If you apply it with just the tape, there is a product called Undo that will allow you to remove the tape and remove the hinge. I've not done that before, but you can. It's possible. But if you add glue, you can't do that. All right, so I want to show you something I just did. I went over slightly. This is going to show, so I'm going to trim that off. Make sure you don't go over with your tape, and if you do, when you remove the back, make sure you fold the tape over so that it is hidden behind the project. You don't want it sticking out. All right, so a couple more strips of tape and we're ready to go. I'm just going to center this one because I can't get two. All right. Now you can see this is the hinge and we've got quite a bit of space, 2 3/4 inches on either side. Some people like to trim this down narrower. I like to leave it because I think of these wings as being anchors to further ensure that the hinge stays in the book. So it's up to you. You can make it narrower. I would recommend if you do that you keep a minimum of 1/2 inch on either side of the last hinge so that you've got a built-in gusset for between the cover and the first page and last page, if that makes sense. So again, this is what I recommend, but I've seen it done both ways. Burnish everything, and then we'll start to get this laid in. And then I've made 3 of the 4 pages, which I'll show you, and then we're gonna make one together, and that will be the base of this album. And then when I come back in the next video, we'll focus on getting in the elements that are custom for the Lost in Paradise album. So up until this point, everything I'm doing is pretty basic, and you could use this 8.5 by 10.5 album for anything and add any flaps you want. But if you want to customize it for the Lost in Paradise, that will be in my next video. And I'm almost done here because I gotta go take care of my dog. She's not happy for some reason. All right, so now I'm gonna stand up so I can get on top of all of this. And I want to line these up straight because as I'm looking down, I want that space to be even, left to right, top to bottom. I'm going to shift it down. And so I'm looking for an even distance between here and this score line, and the same thing on the back side. And I want it to be the same on top as it is on bottom. I don't want this to go in sideways. You can see a little bit of tape sticking out, so I'm just tucking it in. Okay. That looks pretty good. Now here's where I'm going to use that tool. So there's some lines here, so I can run this across the bottom and see if it's rising or falling. And it's rising on this side, so it is actually a little bit cockeyed. And I just set it down. I haven't burnished anything, so I'm going to lift it and try again. In fact, I might use this down here on the bottom to help. This is where you can put a reference line too. But if you do, you have to come back and erase it because it is going to be exposed. Okay, that's it. Okay, I'm in. So the next thing we want to do is start working our paper down here in the hinge. On the front and back. Okay. And then we want to go in between each one of the hinges. There we go. All right, so the next thing is we've got some pocket pages. So this book is designed with 4 pocket pages. And I'm just going to shuffle that all. These are some of the flaps that I've designed. So the pocket page is going to be 10 by 8.5, 10 by 8.5, and you'll need 2 of those, 10 by 8.5. So it's going to look like this. And what I did was I just went ahead and left it at 11 inches. I'm going to put this together in the 11-inch form. And then once it's together, I'm going to trim it at 10. And that way I know I have a really flush edge because I've trimmed it together. Does that make sense? So this is 8.5 by 11, 8.5 by 11. We're going to put them together and then we'll trim it. And then here's the 3 that I've already completed. So we're going to put the score line at 1/2 inch on the 8.5 inch side. And I gotta get this oriented. Oh, I want the tape toward me. There we go. All right, and I got it stuck to me. So normally I trim my paper to fit before I stick it together, but I thought, well, why not just go ahead and put it together and then trim off the excess? And I think that actually works pretty well. Because if you're doing it that way, all you're really making sure is this way is lining up, because if the edges don't, you're going to trim it off anyway. So now remember, when you're gluing the second half, I'm going to move this out of our field of vision. When you're putting on the second piece, you want to make sure you're pressing your hand across the center so you don't have a bubble like so. So you just want to lay your hand across the center and have it lay down nicely on the tape, press it into place, and now we're going to go trim off that extra inch. And I know it needs to be 8 by 10 when I'm finished, so I went ahead and took part of it off this side. I'm going to take part off this side, and that way I know I have a perfect square. Okay, there we are. So now the finished pocket page is 8 by 10. You'll need 4 of those, and here they are. And because we've oriented this in a landscape, these pockets are going to slide on just like so. And then we'll have a finished album. So in order to get the pockets to adhere to the book and stay in place, we need to put tape on either side of these hinges. and then go ahead and slip our pockets on. So I'm going to take a break here and get my tape lined up and get ready to do that, but I'm not quite ready yet, so I'll take a few minutes, get ready, and then when I come back, we'll finish laying in the pocket pages, and essentially the base album will be complete. When I come back for the last video, or for the next video, we will be adding all the customizations for the Graphic 45 Lost in Paradise collection. So there you have it. There's our 8.5 by 10.5 base album. We're almost there. I'll be back to finish the rest. Everyone, I'm back and I have got my tape down. So I'm ready to install the pages. And I also went ahead and trimmed out 2 pieces of paper to cover the back and front of the album. And you'll need 2 of these, 8 3/8 by 10 3/8. 8 3/8 by 10 3/8, and they're going to go on either side. And I'm actually going to go ahead and get those in, and then we're going to focus on getting the pages inserted. And that will be it for the base album. So because these are flat, they don't have any score lines, they're just going to lay right here on the back and front. I'm going to adhere these actually using a wet adhesive, since I don't have to worry about this flexing at all. So I'm just going to use my art glitter glue, go around the edges, scribble a little on the inside, and lay these down. Alright, so I'm going to turn my book so that I can see these 2 corners and have those be right in front of me, so I can figure out where to lay this down, and I can see the top and bottom margins. And the other nice thing about the glue is it gives you a little bit of time to shift it into place. Okay, we're done. Or at least we're done with one. Now we'll do the other side. And this is just trim to fit here. So I just made it an 1/8 inch smaller than the size of the cardstock that I started with. Okay, that looks good. Always want to double check before you get your glue on, in case you need to trim it. Okay. Okay, that's it. I'm just going to burnish this a little bit, and I'm going to figure out which is the top of my album, and I think it's this side, and then I'm going to start inserting our pages. And all I'm really looking for is the side that's most attractive, that has the smoothest edge to go down. I gotta get a little more glue here. That did not quite take. Not quite enough, a little too much. Okay, get that down. In. I guess I missed a couple spots, so I'm just going back around double checking that all my corners are good. And I think I'm all right. So I'm going to press those into place. All right. And it looks pretty straight both ways, so I'm not sure I can really tell it. Actually, sorry, I'm still dealing with glue. Still need to get a little more in here. That's kind of unlike me. I usually do too much glue. Okay, so now the pages, we've got 4 of these, right? And they measure 10 by 8.5. 10 by 8.5. You'll need 2 of those. You're going to put them together. You're going to score 1/2 inch. On the 8.5 inch side, you're going to score 1/2 inch. So that becomes 10 by 8. And then you sandwich these 2 together. And I showed you that in the last clip. So now we're just going to focus on getting them installed. And I'm going to put the cap on my glue real quick so it doesn't dry out. And I'm going to start just by taking a tab off one corner, folding it down, and then I'm going to slip this on and figure out its placement before I pinch it down. And then I'll slide the rest of the tape off. Okay, there we go. And that looks pretty good. Okay, so there's a couple things I want to do when I'm in this process. One of them is to make sure I have good adhesion on both sides, so there is tape on both sides. But the other is when I lay this down, I'm looking for this to go in straight with the book. So when I say straight, what do I mean? What I'm looking for is for this page not to be sagging down or to be pitching up as I go across. So I'm just looking for a nice steady line, and it's actually pitching slightly up. So I'm going to slightly adjust it. Yep. Okay, that's right on before I pull the tape off. Okay, so now I'm gonna, so I know I've got the tape on this corner on the other side, and I'm comfortable with that holding while I take this side off. Then I'll come back and pull the other side off. But you always have to get at least one corner down, and then if it's pitching up or down, you tweak it and then pull the tape off. Okay. So I'm going to check one more time because we're getting ready to make a commitment here. And it looks perfect. It's tracking. All right, so this side's in. Now I'm going to come back because this is already done, and we'll go ahead and pull this tab down. And it just kind of works like a little zipper. You just pull it across. There we go. And that looks good. Okay, now we're going to do that with each one of the papers. Before we completely remove the tape, we're going to check it as it lays down against this side to make sure it's not pitching up or down before we make a commitment. And a commitment, I mean by taking the rest of the tape off. So I just want to expose just enough to grab the panel on one corner. Okay. Let's squeeze that down. Now, while it's on, I'm going to lay it down, and I want to align it with the one just above it, like so. As you can see, these are stacked really nice and neat. And if you can't, I'm going to put a little contrast under here so you can. So you can see that stacked nice and neat. If it was off, it might look something like that. So we're looking to have this be nice and tidy like so. Okay, so I'm going to go back, push down. And when I say push down, I'm pushing down against the spine. I'm going to open it back up, pull it into place, and now I can remove this tape. And I'm holding it with this hand while I remove the tape. And then I'm going to push against it while making sure that the hinge goes all the way down. Okay, there we go. That one's in. Pretty easy. And then once you get that in, even though it may not look even on here, what's important is that it's laying down flat, and it is. Oops, I lost some of my tape, which that happens. So that's what your pick tool's for. Reach in there, and you should be able to pull it out. There we go. Okay, that's nice and even. Okay, we're going to do that again 2 more times, and then this book is ready for the customization pieces. So okay, and lay it down, looking to make sure the pages are even. I'm pushing down that edge. Now I'm going to come back and pull out the tape. There's still a little tape left in. I'm going to reach in and get it. It keeps tearing on me. A little more. We're almost there. There we go. Now that's in. Now we're going to open the other side. Go ahead and pull our tab down. I think I'm losing my tape again. There we go. There we go. You can see I'm keeping a nice straight line. And now we're off to our last one. Okay, that's in. I'm gonna have to yank it around because I can't quite see what I'm doing. Bring it to me. There we go. Okay. I'm not pressing very hard because I don't want this to tear off underneath. There we go. Okay, so now we've got all 4 pages in, and in my next video we'll come back and we'll start adding the flaps, the pockets, and all the interactive pieces for the tutorial for the customizations for Lost in Paradise. Okay, so that's it for our 8.5 by 10.5 mini album. Thanks for tuning in, and the next part, like I said, will be to customize for Lost in Paradise. Thanks for watching. This is Daphne from Scrap and Create. For more information about this video and our shop, just click the More button. You'll see some information about what I'm using in this tutorial and where you can find it in our shop. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. Thanks for tuning in.